Yes, Senator.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Benal. Senator Warnock from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Fraud is a serious problem in the United States, and in this sector is growing. A Gallup study found that 8% of respondents said that they had personally been a victim of fraud in the past year, 8%. In the first quarter of 2023, reports of financial fraud per capita occurred more often in Georgia than in any other state, according to data published by the Federal Trade Commission. Forbes Advisor ranked Georgia the 5th most financially scammed state during that time period. With these incidents of fraud becoming more sophisticated and more realistic, unsuspecting folks, seniors, and others are being targeted directly and personally, meaning that consumer education plays a key role in stopping scams and fraud before they start. Ms. Sanchez-Adams, what have been some effective ways to educate consumers regarding the risk of financial fraud and scams?
Well, sir, I think that financial education is extremely important, but it doesn't solve the problem, especially because the scams change overnight. So you tell them about one thing and then it changes to the next day. So, there's things that you could be done like in-app warnings. And I know that, Mr. Benda has spoken about some of the things that the banks do. You can make some things in-app, but I think more than that, you need to hold the institutions that are receiving those payments from the fraudsters more responsible for reimbursing consumers that are harmed.
So in that regard, are there additional authorities and resources that the federal government needs in order to protect Americans from financial fraud?
Yes, I think you could pass legislation, as I mentioned, in the EFTA to hold those institutions that are receiving the payments responsible, to have them bear some liability. The CFPB can do things through regulation, and certainly I agree that we should have the task force to get more information and more people at the table to talk about this and come up with solutions.
So there's more work to be done, and our rulemaking and legislation hasn't kept pace with the reality on the ground. Is that a fair assessment?
That is correct.
Now, my home state of Georgia is a hub for financial technology and payment processing. In fact, Georgia-based payment processing firms handle about 70% of United States transactions. Many fintech and payments companies are focusing on activities that traditionally were handled by consumer banking, including digital payment apps and wallets. When consumers transfer money using traditional financial tools, there are financial protection laws in place for these traditional tools that protect their money. But since many of these digital payment systems are owned by large non-bank financial companies, they may not carry the same safeguards as financial institutions or debit and credit cards. Last November, the CFPB proposed a rule that would ensure that certain non-bank digital wallets and digital payments apps are subject to the same supervisory oversight as banks and credit unions, again, keeping pace with the reality on the ground. How would the CFPB's proposed rule help protect provide additional protections to consumers who rely on these payment apps?
Yeah, they would have supervision authority, meaning that they can go in and examine the books. They can talk to them to see the policies and procedures for them protecting consumers from both unauthorized transactions, to see if they're actually reimbursing consumers, doing reasonable investigations, or what they're doing to protect fraudulently induced scams, like basically, especially things like Cash App and Venmo, who have access to both accounts and are seeing those that are receiving the fraudulent payments and where it's going, that they can freeze them, stop them, investigate them, and try to make consumers whole.
There's no question that consumers deserve to know that their funds are protected by consumer protection laws, regardless of their payment method. We can't have one set of guardrails for one sector and not have the same guardrails for another sector, or as we see increasing digital operations in the banking sector or the financial sector. What other steps can be taken to protect consumers?
So one thing is to make sure that consumers are reimbursed for fraudulently induced transactions, or scams as people talk about that. Full stop. And then hold those financial institutions that are receiving fraudulent payments responsible, and make sure that payment systems are doing more to protect consumers as well.
Great. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Warnock. Senator Warren of Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. So, cyber criminals are exploiting cryptocurrency to scam American consumers out of billions of dollars every year.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Bank spending on buybacks is rising again, and their consumer small banking revenue has sharply increased. Interest rates are high, yet the interest being paid to depositors, ordinary working families, working people with bank accounts. Not a lot of money in Wall Street accounts, remains low. Chairman Powell, I'm concerned that when banks don't increase the interest rates on bank accounts, families are losing out on dollars that could be in their pockets. Again, they don't have the kinds of portfolios that some of the folks in this room would have. Is that good for the economy? And are you concerned that banks under your supervision are doing this?
Are not paying sufficient.
That's correct.
That's a question I haven't heard. Of course, they have the option of putting their money in money market funds, and banks compete with each other. But I'll be happy to look into that. I hadn't heard that concern.
Yeah, and I think it is worth taking a look at. Many lower income individuals and families, again, they don't have some of the sophisticated products yet. Money markets are available, but we saw high interest rates and that not being reflected in what depositors are able to benefit from. Could those individuals and families benefit from a high interest rate on their deposits?
Sure. And, it's for a long time, we had a lot of mail from people at the Fed to the Fed saying, you should raise interest rates because we're not getting anything on our checking accounts. So we solved that problem.
I don't think we're asking for that, but given the reality, the question. Yeah. So let me pivot. The Monetary Policy Report states that while demand for housing has fallen, a strong labor market has kept prices high. That matches what I've been seeing in Georgia. Too many folks can't afford a home. According to the Monetary Policy Report, mortgage rates were averaging around 7% last month. That's tough for lower income home buyers. Increases of just a percentage point or two can be the difference between owning a home or not. Are you concerned about this interplay between lower demand yet stubbornly high prices and what it means for folks trying to buy a home? And what do you think is driving these high prices?
So the housing market is in a very challenging situation right now. You have this longer run housing shortage, but at the same time, you've got a bunch of things that have to do with the pandemic and the inflation and our response with higher rates. So you have a shortage of homes available for sale because many people are living in homes with a very low rate mortgage that they can't afford to refinance, so they're not moving, which means the supply of regular existing homes that are for sale is historically low and very low transaction rate. That actually pushes up prices of other existing homes and also of new homes because there's just not enough supply. The builders are busy, but they're running into all kinds of supply issues still around zoning and workers and things like that. So it's quite challenging. And of course, rates are high. So people who are buying, a lot of the buyers are cash buyers or are able to actually pay without a mortgage because mortgages are expensive. I will say the first problem, the longer run problem of supply, is a longer run problem. The other problems associated with low rate mortgages and high rates and all that, those will abate as the economy normalizes and as rates normalize. But we'll still be left with a housing market nationally where there's a housing shortage.
There's no question we have a supply issue, and this issue of high prices, lack of supply, of course, disproportionately impacts some communities more than others. According to the Monetary Policy Report, the employment rate for the Black prime age labor force, that is, persons between 25 and 54 years of age, reached a historical peak in 2023. The gap between black and white prime age employment dropped to a nearly 50-year low at around 3%. We can appreciate progress, but a 3% gap is still significant. Would you agree that it is important to continue focusing on narrowing this gap? And if so, what tools does the Federal Reserve have to do this work?
It's very important, and the single best thing we can do is get prices under control, get inflation under control, so that we can have a long expansion with, the record is clear that a long expansion really gives significant benefits to people at the low end of the income spectrum, because the labor market gets very tight, inflation is low, and they benefit more than anybody. So that's where we were before the pandemic, and we'd like to get back to that place.
Thank you so very much. I think there are some other legislative tools that Congress could use, and I'm happy to continue to work with the chair in the ways that we've already done to improve that difference. Thank you. For sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Scott. We'll turn next to Senator Warnock. And before Senator Warnock's question, I'm going to have to be out for a period of time, probably about a half an hour, but between now and then, senators will be able to ask their questions, and I'll be back. But I think after Senator Warnock, we'll go to Senator Vance, and then Senator Fetterman, and somewhere in between there, Senator Braun will be back, and he'll ask his questions. Senator Warnock.
Thank you so very much, Chair Casey, for holding this important hearing. And Commissioner O'Malley, it's great to see you again. Of course, I've known you a long time, first as Mayor O'Malley when I pastored a church in Baltimore. Governor O'Malley, and now Commissioner, thank you for your lifelong commitment to service. My office frequently hears from Georgians about benefit overpayments and subsequent clawbacks. I know you've talked about that in your opening statement, but I think it's always important that we center the people as we discuss policy, remember the human face of the issues we talk about. A few years ago, Savannah resident Denise got a letter from the Social Security Administration informing her that she owed the agency $58,000 in overpayments through no fault of her own. She wasn't aware of it until she got the notice years later. She couldn't afford to pay that amount back, and the agency reduced her monthly benefits to the point where she can no longer afford her rent. That's the human cost, the human face of these policy issues and issues that need to be resolved. You said one of your priorities is to address overpayments, and I know you've addressed that to some degree in your opening statement. But as we think about the question, how does the agency plan to address this systemic issue? If you were to outline, say, the top 2 or 3 things that you think about that need to be done right now to begin to resolve this, what would those be?
Yes, sir. This is one of the top. On January 2nd, I sent now hear this sort of welcome back after the New Year's holiday to the command staff, the senior executive service. I said, we're in a customer service crisis. Our top priorities are the 1-800 number at the time it takes for a disability determination, and thirdly, to address the injustice we do to real people who, through no fault of their own, find themselves in a position of having 100% of their benefits that they live on intercepted until they can make other overpayment arrangements. Before I had even been confirmed, there was an outstanding person assigned to untangle this problem and its impact, as you said, Senator, on real people, and her name is Leanne Strieber. And she's done an outstanding job to help us do a deep dive and get our heads around what is the universe of people and what are the root causes and what can we do right now so that our obedience to the congressional mandate that we take actions to recover overpayments when there's been a mistake doesn't run contrary to the whole purpose of the act itself, which is to keep seniors from being, put under a bridge through no fault of their own. So the top things that we are doing is today I'm able to announce that we are no longer going to have that clawback cruelty of intercepting 100% of a payment if people do not respond to our notice to call us and work out other terms. The second thing we're going to do is shift the burden from asking the claimant to prove that they didn't contribute to it, instead to a neutral position. If we have reason that says that they were at fault, well, we should have to produce that reason, not them. And then the third thing that we're going to do is, actually two more. Third thing is that just as the VA, when they make mistakes, has a 60-month period to recoup that overpayment, we had been operating on 36 months. We're going to extend that to 60. And finally, we're going to make it easier for people who have received an overpayment to be able to file for a waiver and have that issue resolved. And we hope that we're looking to do more as well. I'm not able to announce that now. I mean, because a lot of this involves training and changes the system so that when people walk into the 1,210 field offices with an overpayment, they're properly managed. But those things will all have a big impact on some of the people who find themselves in the positions like the woman who called your office.
It's good to hear the ways in which you're focused on this, and we'll remain vigilant alongside you in this effort. People like Denise and others shouldn't have to be penalized for a situation that they did not create. I see I have just 5 seconds, so I'll end with that. Thank you so very much.
Senator, thank you, and for your leadership and friendship through the years.
Great. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Senator Warnock of Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Chair Brown. The United States has become increasingly reliant on sanctions as a foreign policy tool over the past 20 years. I remain concerned that untargeted sanctions may only harm the poorest of the poor throughout the world. Oftentimes, economic sanctions, as well-intentioned as they may be, are not felt by the governing class, the people who are actually making the decisions. Instead, they're felt by the poor and the meek, those with little say over the activities of those in power. They're literally caught in the crossfire. There's an old African statement that when the elephants fight, the grass suffers. Deputy Secretary Adeyemo, shortly after you took office in 2021, you led a broad review of the sanctions administered and enforced by the Treasury Department. What were the review's findings regarding how we can best ensure that our sanctions have the intended effect and deter bad behavior?
So, Senator, I appreciate you asking this question because I think it is an issue that we don't speak enough about, which is that we need to make sure that our sanctions are targeted towards the threat actors and that we do as much as possible to reduce the harm against innocent individuals. That's why one of the findings of the sanctions review was the need to have very clear humanitarian carve-outs for the vast majority of our sanctions programs. But in addition to that, we needed to make sure that these sanctions are tied to a clear foreign policy objective, and that, two, they are narrowly targeted in order to make sure that we have an impact on the threat actor, but not on the overall population. I think the findings of that sanctions review has influenced what we've done with regard to Russia and continues to influence the way we think about using sanctions going forward.
Thank you so much. It's so important that the sanctions do what they're actually intended to do, and that we don't create needless harm on suffering and innocent people who are already marginalized. Speaking of humanitarian aid, and you talked about these humanitarian carve-outs as part of your response given the findings of the study. As you know, Gaza is experiencing right now a humanitarian crisis of unspeakable, at unspeakable levels. The trickle of aid entering Gaza is not nearly enough, not even close, to meet the needs of the Palestinian people. And the majority of Palestinians in Gaza are at severe risk of famine. We must ensure that U.S. policy is not standing in the way of providing urgent humanitarian assistance to Palestinian civilians, particularly the children. And at the same time, there's a real risk of terrorist groups like Hamas diverting aid for its own benefit. That's why I was glad to see Treasury issue guidance on providing humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people without inadvertently financing Hamas very shortly after October 7th. Deputy Secretary Adeyemo, can you update us on the implementation of this guidance regarding issuance of general licenses and regarding oversight?
So, Senator, one of the early things we did after Hamas's brutal attack on Israel was take actions to go after Hamas's finances. But we also sat down with financial institutions and humanitarian groups to make sure that they had the ability to continue to provide legitimate aid and financial assistance in Gaza. One of the things that we learned at that point was the challenge wasn't U.S. sanctions given our humanitarian carve-out, but were the sanctions put in place by some of our allies. Soon after, I traveled to Europe and with our European allies work with them to put in place a similar humanitarian carve-out in their program in order to put us all in the same position where we could both target actions to go after Hamas, but to ensure that legitimate humanitarian assistance could flow through. My goal and my team's goal is to continue to meet with financial institutions, but also with aid groups to ensure that our sanctions are in no way prohibiting the legitimate flow of financial resources and other resources into Gaza, because to your point, I agree that not enough is being done, not enough is getting through, and we have to do everything in our power to make sure that we change that dynamic.
So what needs to happen for the delivery of aid to be more effective?
So, Senator, this is not primarily in my domain. The issues that are in my domain, though, are making sure that financial resources are able to flow. And the goal there has to be the continued engagement, not only of the United States government, but of the UK government and the EU government, the countries that are primarily putting sanctions in place with our financial institutions and with our humanitarian groups to ensure that they are not in any way being blocked in the delivery of legitimate humanitarian assistance. What I've heard from those groups to date is that the challenge they face is a fiscal one in terms of being able to get aid in, not a financial one. But what I've also told them is the moment they feel as if in some way they have a financial block, I want them to call me immediately, because our goal is to make sure that our sanctions are targeted towards Hamas, not towards impacting the innocent Palestinian people.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so very much. We have to work to ensure that there's rigorous oversight of aid to Palestinians, working also with our European and other allies to both ensure that it actually provides assistance to those in need. And we want to certainly make sure that Hamas does not divert any sort of aid for its own purposes. Thank you so very much, Mr. Secretary.
Thanks, Senator Warnock. Senator Britt of Alabama is recognized.
Madam Chair, listen, the stakes are simply too high for commercial aircraft to have the kinds of systemic problems that we're seeing with Boeing. So I'd like to examine how we got here with this panel. Dr. DeLuise, yes or no, through organization designation authorizations or ODAs, can the FAA delegate certain safety, certification, and other responsibilities to an aircraft manufacturer like Boeing? Yes or no? Yes or no?
Yes, but currently, yes, because it's done with other manufacturers, but there are issues, as described in our report, that makes us be leery of saying, yeah, go ahead and just do it. I think that Boeing needs to prove that it is capable of doing it.
But the question is, are they able to delegate certain safety and certification responsibilities to an aircraft like, so they are, the answer is yes, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, so Dr. Dillinger, yes or no, can an aircraft manufacturer like Boeing subcontract manufacturing responsibilities for, say, the fuselage of its signature MAX aircraft line to another company?
The work of the panel, I think, would say yes, like with ODAs, that we heard successful examples of ODA delegation. However, the concerns remain about the risk that Boeing's safety culture presents to that process.
Yeah, I share that concern, which is why I'm asking the question. Dr. Meshkati, yes or no, can a manufacturer subcontracted by Boeing, such as Spirit Aerosystems, assign manufacturer responsibilities to an international affiliate in Malaysia, for example?
787 is now made all over the world. Wings in one country, the other wing in another country, fuselage in another country, they are doing that.
So the authorization can then be passed from FAA to a manufacturer. The manufacturer can subcontract that manufacturing responsibility to another entity. And then the manufacturer subcontracted by Boeing can assign manufacturing responsibilities to an international affiliate, which I'm sure you've realized that what we walked through step by step is a supply chain of the Boeing MAX 9 aircraft at the heart of the near catastrophic door plug blowout that happened in January 2024 to an Alaska Airlines flight. You know, there are many words for this. You can call it delegating, subcontracting, reassigning. At the end of the day, it's outsourcing. Outsourcing key responsibilities, none more important than safety oversight, to someone else, to someone else, to someone else. I submit that while we're focused on Boeing, this is obviously not just a Boeing problem. This is far too common across aviation systems and its suppliers, whether the result of poor leadership, a focus on production targets, profit margins at all costs, even the cost of safety, or some combination of both. Congress must take a serious look at this culture of outsourcing and its safety implications. This is an instance in which we can't afford a mistake. It costs too much. Dr. Dillinger, what more can Boeing do to improve its safety culture and our own responsibility for the safety of its products?
Thank you, Senator. The panel focused a great deal on safety culture, and there is so much that they could be doing. Part of it has to do with the timing, and if they were to accelerate the efforts, I think, and the panel thinks that that would be beneficial. There has been a very soft start to that, to implementing the training, to getting feedback back from employees via their own surveys, to providing workshops, to focusing specifically on training at different levels. So for example, executive training, yes, but down through the other layers of the organization to managers and supervisors, targeted training. There's multiple ways that they could be going after that. And as they look at a more comprehensive way where they really dive in and in a more timely way address that, the panel felt that that would be important and that it was in our recommendations.
Great. Thank you so very much for that. Dr. DeLuise and Dr. Meshkati, last question. What more can Congress do to encourage both the FAA and manufacturers like Boeing to take direct responsibility for the safety of aircraft and our aviation system?
I believe that the Congress and this committee needs to keep essentially the pressure on to make sure that the waivers are not granted on safety-related issues, for example. That would be a good thing, because they right now there are a handful of waivers on the MAX that directly affect safety. But you need to keep the spotlight on this, because during our interviews, we heard often the sentiment expressed, yeah, this is happening now, but as soon as everybody moves on to something else, we're going to go back to the way things were. And that can't happen. It's too, as you say, it's too expensive, and the cost in human lives is way too high.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you. That is also related to an earlier question by Senator Cantwell. I think what Congress can do vis-a-vis FAA, and that's also related to the SMS, There is a document which is signed by FAA Administrator and then Chair of NTSB, the Honorable Robert Sumwalt. It's called State Safety Program. This is something that United States files with the International Civil Aviation Organization. In this one, this is very interesting, Senator. It talks about the safety management responsibility for the state for the application of SMS at FAA. What I would suggest and what can Congress do is to create another panel like the one that we are in, Section 103, to look at the implementation of this report and how does United States stand vis-a-vis this report. If this state safety program being fully implemented, what needs to be done? Because that has a kind of a impact or it can tremendously impact FAA's power on using basically, in the case of SMS, for example, in United States, is only FAA, correct me, my colleagues here, has the SMS on for air traffic controller. Great. And SMS needs, there is a notice of rulemaking for SMS, but SMS needs to be fully incorporated. And if this document be fully implemented at FAA and other places, I think that would be a good solution.
Thank you so much. I know I'm way out of time. I appreciate your indulgence, Madam Chair, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on this committee to improve aviation safety.
Thank you so much.
Senator Brett, Senator Warnock from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you so very much, Chair Brown. According to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, there are just a handful of private equity firms that individually own more than 10,000 single-family homes around Atlanta. And during this time of elevated rates and in the middle of a housing crisis, large institutional investors and Wall Street private equity firms from outside Georgia are effectively boxing first-time, first-generation home buyers out of the housing market by gobbling up the available housing stock in Atlanta. This is particularly egregious when you think about the role that Wall Street played in what we saw just a few years ago with the crash. This is also why I previously introduced the Housing Market Transparency Act, legislation that would provide greater transparency over who actually owns properties built under the low-income housing tax credit, which includes significant private equity investors. I'd like to ask the Honorable Sandra Thompson, Acting Secretary, thank you for all the work that your agency has done to make homeownership more affordable for Americans, but I'm troubled by the increase in private equity ownership in the housing market. What steps is your agency taking to ensure that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are not passing economic benefits intended for ordinary Americans to private equity firms?
Sure. So thank you for the question. And Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac do not engage in institutional investors for single-family rentals at all. The agency had one transaction in 2018 and decided to not engage in those activities anymore. So we do not permit institutional investors to purchase loans for acquisition. I would say, though, that there's a number of investors that these are more mom and pop as opposed to institutional investors. Like Fannie Mae has a requirement that one person can have 10 properties, like one individual, and Freddie Mac, one person can have 6. But those, again, are more local mom and pop. They're not institutional investors.
But so are there steps, though, that your agency can take to protect ordinary folks from this increase in private equity ownership in the marketplace at large?
Well, for the loans that Fannie and Freddie won't purchase those loans because they're ineligible to make those loans. So one of the things that we do with our REO portfolio is we have a 30-day first look period where investors are not able, the house goes on the market and you have to be owner occupied or a community development investment fund or a nonprofit to purchase. First, you get 30 days before the house goes on the market. So those are some of the things that we have done.
So my larger concern, obviously, is to ensure that ordinary, hardworking American families in Georgia, all across our country, have access to the American dream. And this is what allows for generational wealth. It gets passed, allows for generational wealth. So as home prices have increased, the ability for many Americans to purchase an affordable home has moved out of reach. This is particularly true for first-generation home buyers. On top of this, we see a racial home ownership gap that actually widened in 2023. Only 44% of Black Americans own a home, a total that's almost 29 percentage points lower than white Americans. Acting Secretary Todman, under President Biden, federal housing agencies have been committed to providing resources for new home buyers. I was glad to see the president call on Congress to pass a $10,000 tax credit for first-time home buyers. Can you detail why this home credit is important, and who is it targeting?
Senator, thank you for that question. And I think you've provided the facts very clearly in terms of who will be most assisted by this type of investment in first-time homeowners. And I'll take it to the next level, first-generation home ownership, which was a part of the president's proposal in his 2025 budget proposal. This is critical. We know that homeownership remains the number one way that the middle class is able to generate and sustain generational wealth. And as you so well said, there's only about 44% of Black Americans that have access to that generational wealth. And so we know that by providing concepts like first generation down payment, we know what that means in the long term. We know that having a tax credit that allows those families who are locked out of home ownership, what it means to sort of have access to that type of subsidy to write down some of their upfront costs. But we also know that we have to do more as a country, and we're doing more as an administration to make sure that there are homeownership units to purchase by making sure we can encourage the increase of supply of starter homes. So we are looking at this in the full 360 and look forward to sharing more with you and your team.
Well, thank you. That's exactly the work that my Down Payment Toward Equity Act is focused on, helping these first-generation home buyers buy down the rate, support them with closing costs, et cetera. Thank you for your work on this, and I look forward to working with the chair and the committee to get legislation signed into law.
Thank you. Senator.
We found that grocery store consolidation has increased significantly over the last 3 decades. When grocers consolidate, farmers have fewer options to sell their goods. And as a result of this, they have less negotiating power when it comes to securing contracts. So their hands are tied. I've had many conversations with farmers all across Georgia. It's a tough business. The margins are very narrow. These kinds of things make a big difference. And so in order to cut down on their bottom line, grocers often require farmers to fulfill larger and larger contracts at lower and lower prices. And so it becomes a volume business. Small and mid-sized farmers get squeezed from both sides because they can't produce the quantity required at the prices demanded by these big retailers. In short, farmers are forced to either get big or get out. Mr. Maxwell, you're a farmer. What pressures are you and your fellow farmers feeling right now because of this reality?
Senator, you described the reality of market opportunity. We would suggest that in most instances the market is dead, that the farmers become price takers. They no longer have the ability to recover the production of cost, and far too often, because of concentration, are reliant upon government subsidies in order to make a profit at the end of the year. When government increases those subsidies, like reference pricing, then those companies, like I testified earlier to, simply set a higher price to the farmer because they know the farmer is going to receive more funds. They just go after it because there's no competition. So that's the reality that we're living in, squeezed from both ends and trying to wiggle in the middle just so there can be the next generation on our farm.
Yeah, we're seeing it in even large producers. I'm a lover of Vidalia onions down in Vidalia, Georgia, but large producers, well-known products like Vidalia onions are feeling the pressure. And this certainly starts with market consolidation. That's part of the issue, right?
Yes, Senator. We visited with some of your Vidalia onion farmers in Georgia, and they are feeling the pressure as they have to expand because there's not a market opportunity to move the onions into a market at the volume that they're currently producing. And so their choice, as you described earlier, is either to get bigger or get out, leaving many of those farmers, multi-generation farmers, burdened with the cost of the production they've had in the past and no market to move their onions
So
to.
decreased competition impact all the way down the food chain in a different sense of the word, all the way down to the consumer.
The concentration impacts the prices, input prices to farmers who are consumers, and then ultimately those prices move on into the stream, forcing the retail consumer, grocery retail consumer, to see higher prices in the grocery store. The odd thing is if you look in the middle, the folks making the most money are those concentrated processors, meat processors, the JBSs, the Tysons, the Cargills, the processors that the chair mentioned earlier this afternoon, and ultimately the consumer pays the price at the grocery store retail shelf.
Analysis, to go to a different subject or related subject, analysis from the Reinvestment Fund finds that nearly 1 million Georgians live in a community with limited access to a grocery store, 15% increase over the prior decade, and USDA has found that this greater consolidation in rural, it's greater in rural counties than in larger markets, while rural communities are responsible for producing the food that feeds our country. Rural residents are often some of the most food insecure, ironically, among us. And we know that people of color in rural areas are more likely to face hunger because of a lack of food access. In 2021, Black Americans in rural communities were 2.2 times more likely to face hunger than white Americans. Dr. Owens, because of a consolidated grocery industry, many rural Americans must travel farther to get to the grocery store, often with fewer nutritious and healthy options. How would more competition in the grocery sector benefit rural communities?
Yeah, absolutely. Grocery inflation in rural areas is running above grocery inflation in other areas. So more competition and more access to more and different grocers in rural areas would absolutely help families get better deals at the grocery store.
Thank you so much. I'm sure we could say a lot more on this subject, but in the final analysis, corporate consolidation in the grocery sector is driving up prices and leaving Americans, particularly those in rural communities, with fewer options than before. Ensuring healthy options exist for all Georgians, regardless of where they live, needs to be a priority of Congress, and it's something that I continue to work on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Warnock.
Senator Warnock.
Thank you so very much, Chair Casey, and my thanks to you and Senator Tester for holding this important hearing today. First Lady Rosalind Carter, a great Georgian, used to say that there are only 4 kinds of people in the world. She said that there are those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. Yet our caregiving infrastructure is falling short for too many, including our veterans. The VA boasts generous caregiving programs for veterans and their families. Grateful for the work that happens there, but 2 of our witnesses today confronted challenges with one federal program intended to financially support caregivers of injured veterans, the Program of Comprehensive Assistance for Family Caregivers, or the PCAFC. Ms. Neeskens, I am deeply sorry to hear about your husband's grueling experiences with the PCAFC reassessment process. you are the human face of the public policy issues that we're trying to address, and it's important that we center the families that undergo this, the veterans in this work. So tell me, how can the VA improve the reassessment process so veterans won't have to experience the turmoil you and Kelly faced?
The regulatory changes that were implemented, which required ADL assistance each and every time, and supervision, protection, and instruction assistance at a rate of continuous daily care, were exclusionary, and therefore needs such as my husband has for neurogenic bowel and seizure care and things like that, while those are very serious and require constant care, regular care, they are episodic. And therefore, because of that, the nature of the disability itself, they were unable to meet the standard of each and every time and continuous daily care. And so that language is problematic and should be changed.
Thank you so much. Again, you're the human face. It's public policy. Regulations often don't match where people actually live. And so we have to be very intentional about getting it right. Mr. Townsend, thank you for your service and for being here today as a witness. Like Ms. Neeskens, you and your wife encountered barriers to receiving caregiving support. Can you talk about your experience getting connected to assistance after the VA denied your application for PCAFC?
After we were denied access to the comprehensive program, fortunately, we were still able to access most of the benefits. Lisa has since been enrolled in the general program of caregiver assistance, and we're able to participate in benefits such as respite care. We really haven't had. Put it this way: the main benefit of the comprehensive program is the benefit of, at least for me, is the availability of medical insurance coverage through CHAMP VA. The other benefit, obviously, is the financial support through the stipend. We can live without the stipend, but what made it possible for my wife to retire early and become my full-time caregiver was that availability of CHAMP VA. And in our case, since we were denied access through the comprehensive program, fortunately for us, because of the 100% permanent and total nature of my disability rating, we were able to access that benefit through other means, not through the caregiver program itself.
So you were not automatically connected to the caregiver program?
That's true, sir. It's interesting that as we went through the process of the application of the comprehensive program, in our meetings with, for example, the social worker at the hospital, she explained to us that if we were denied access to the comprehensive program, we still would be able to access the benefits through the general program. We assumed that transition from the comprehensive program to the general program would be almost automatic if we were denied access to the comprehensive program, but come to find out that's not the case. It was only later, when I contacted the staff at the VA in Wilkes-Barre, that we realized that Lisa was not formally enrolled in the basic or general caregiver program. She is now, but it was not an automatic transition. So whatever the committees can do to work with the VA to ensure a more seamless transition between the comprehensive program and the general caregiver program, if you're denied access to the comprehensive program, would be of tremendous benefit. Thank you.
So you both paint a picture of a fractured system where the constituent parts do not talk seamlessly to one another. And so clearly there's room for improvement in addressing the need for continuity of care, making sure veterans don't fall between the tracks. But thank you so very much for your witness and your testimony. I think brings this kind of issue into clear focus and helps us to see the work that we've got to do. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Senator Warnock.
Senator Lummis, I'll ask my question, and let me start by sharing how glad I am, Director Chopra, that the CFPB's funding structure is still intact. I joined my colleagues, was happy to join my colleagues in an amicus brief to the Supreme Court protecting the Bureau, and I'm glad that they got that right, and that the Supreme Court upheld the structure of the CFPB so that we can continue this very, very vital and important work. Director Chopra, yesterday, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau announced a proposed rule that would block medical debt from appearing on most Americans' credit reports. The last time you appeared before this committee, we discussed this bipartisan report that I released not long ago on insulin desert counties with both high rates of Americans who are uninsured and high rates of Americans who have diabetes. We see these counties all across the United States, concentrated largely in the South, but by no means exclusively in the South. High rates of uninsured people, high rates of diabetes. Director Chopra, do you know how many of these insulin deserts also have high rates of medical debt?
So we do believe that this is disproportionately harming some of those communities, especially in the South. I think it's pretty tragic that we have a system where people can be really punished over and over again for health issues and in a way that can destroy their financial life. Medical debts can contribute to bankruptcy. It can contribute to so much loss of income. And I do think what we've proposed is an important step to just a little bit put a stop to some of this.
Yeah, so, and my data shows that nearly half of these insulin deserts also have high levels of medical debt. So you've got places like in the state of Georgia that's still digging in its heels, refusing to expand Medicaid. You got the working poor who are burdened by all of this medical debt, uninsured, all of these issues converging upon families at the same time. In Georgia, 27% of rural residents had medical collections on their credit report, 27%. That's 6 percentage points higher than the rate among all Georgians and 10 percentage points higher than the national average. So 27% of rural residents with medical collection debt. Director Chopra, how would folks in the South especially benefit from a CFPB proposed rule banning medical debt from credit reports?
Well, we expect that it will materially help their lives. In many cases, if medical debt is their only thing on their credit report, it will also materially increase their credit score. That means really the cost of so many other loans, auto loans, credit cards would go down for them. And more importantly, I think they wouldn't be dealing with adding insult to injury when it comes to their own health conditions.
So this would have a material impact, obviously, on the lives of families. I often say that it's expensive to be poor. And this is an example of that. People burdened by medical debt, dragging down their credit scores. And so then the cost of money
goes up. This is a cycle that we have to stop.
Right. So thank you so very much. This is something that we've been pushing on this. And so I applaud you for proposing this rule, which would be life-changing for so many people across the country, but certainly throughout the South who are drowning in medical debt and bad credit, often while dealing with health challenges on top of all of this. This is enough to make anybody sick and sicker. So I'll continue to push my bipartisan bill to cap the cost of insulin for everyone. That would prevent people with diabetes from going into medical debt in the first place. And I look forward to continuing to work with you on medical debt issues and addressing challenges and solutions in my subcommittee.
And let me thank you for working with me on this. I know we had a number of discussions. I know how much it uniquely affects some of the people you serve, so I appreciate all your engagement on it.
Thank you so much. And since it's just the two of us here, you're stuck with me. I've got some more questions I'm going to ask. There's a saying that if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. The CFPB studied the buy now, pay later market and saw that it had the features of a credit card that consumers should get key credit card protections when they use this option. Director Chopra, thank you for issuing a common sense interpretive rule that lets consumers dispute BNPL charges, get a refund, and receive periodic billing statements. I remain concerned about protecting data privacy. What will the CFPB do to make sure BNPL lenders do not harvest and sell consumers' data without permission, and make sure that the data is secure?
It's a huge concern. I think this is something that is critical that this committee has to be working on. We are seeing so many companies announce new initiatives about how they're going to monetize their surveillance of us. Right now, Senator Warnock, you basically get a notice telling you, here's all the ways we're going to use your data. Good luck to you.
Right.
No one really opts out of that, and people don't even understand how much that data is going to be used. And I'm worried we're lurching more toward a surveillance-oriented system. It's really important that we work together to limit some of the excessive and intrusive surveillance.
Sure, absolutely. People just check the box and they're moving on. They're focused on their
Yeah, sometimes they may not even be checking the box. They might be just told through the notice that we're planning to use it for all sorts of purposes. And I think when it comes to this, we're looking at these data brokers as well, these new companies that are buying and selling our personal data. It's also a real national security concern. President Biden has issued an executive order that also urges the CFPB to crack down on some of these data brokers who may not be complying with the Fair Credit Reporting Act.
I think it's so important that people have control over their own data and how companies are using it. I'm also concerned that BNPL loans can lead to a debt trap. What can the CFPB do to keep consumers from sinking under the weight of having too many BNPL loans at once?
Well, it's a really hard question. Both credit cards and buy now, pay later, people can suffer from can really get in over their head and suffer some real financial challenges. So there's now lots of BNPL companies. In many cases, people might have loans with all of them, and it's not just for one type of big purchase. It used to be maybe it was for a substantial purchase that people needed to pay over time. Now you can use buy now, pay later loans for really almost anything, including everyday purchases. So that could lead into an over-indebtedness, and I think we need to make sure we have accurate information about that and that you're all looking about whether there needs to be enhanced protections on credit cards and buy now, pay later loans.
Absolutely, and the public can provide comments on the interpretive rule and buy now, pay later, generally until August 1st. Is that correct?
That's right, and we do think that this buy now, pay later interpretive rule addresses a key pain point that many consumers express, which is when they return a product, are they going to get the appropriate credit? What if there is an erroneous charge? Under federal law, there are certain protections that are long and well understood. There's no exemption for buy now, pay later, and in many cases, they meet the definition for open-end credit or credit cards or whatever it may be that triggers important obligations. We want there to be innovation based on reality, not regulatory arbitrage.
An important issue and one that I'll continue to monitor under my subcommittee on financial institutions and consumer protection. As chair of that subcommittee, I held a hearing on junk fees in July of last year, and I'm pleased that in January, the CFPB issued proposals to restrict fees for overdrafts and non-sufficient funds. Many banks have reduced their fees voluntarily. The CFPB looked at data from 2019 through 2023 and found that consumers have saved more than $6 billion annually in overdraft and NSF fees, $6 billion. However, voluntary fee reductions seem to have hit a plateau. Director Chopra, when do you expect to finalize rules restricting overdraft and NSF fees?
Well, we're hoping any rules would take effect in 2025. We think it would create a more competitive market. And I just want to appreciate all the work being done when it comes to tackling the whole creep of junk fees in the economy. It has been one of the worst innovations in our marketplaces. People need to see the price clearly. They don't need to be charged for mysterious services that they don't even want. And I really want to encourage you, Senator Warnock and others, to think about codifying some of our rules into statute so that, if there's strange legal theories or dragged out litigation from the junk fee lobby, that it won't stop the important benefits of this work.
And I think that's something we certainly should take a look at. And I look forward to seeing us finalize these rules. And as you suggest, think about which of the rules or portions of the rule we may need to codify into law. I'm pleased that the CFPB finalized a rule to require banks to show their work when they set credit card late fees. Families need to use their hard-earned money to put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads rather than paying junk fees. It adds insult to injury to be charged a late fee when you mail a payment on time, but it arrives late. We won't get into the issues around the post office that many of us are addressing. Consumers can't get a break in that regard. I've heard from Georgians who are concerned that bill payments they sent by mail may arrive late due to postal service delays. They may get charged then a late fee on their mortgage or credit card account through no fault of their own. Also, those who are in the market for credit may find that payments marked as late then affect their credit score or cause them to have to pay more for credit. Is there anything that CFPB can do to protect consumers from being charged a late fee due to mail delays?
We got to figure this one out because I'm also hearing that there are other clerical errors where people initiate the bill payment and they have a confirmation, but it doesn't actually get received or it's claimed to not be received. I don't know how we solve this, but the federal law for credit cards does offer some protections on this. I think our work to rein in the abuse of this late fee loophole will help, but you're right. I think there's more we can do and we should figure that out.
Well, thank you so much for your attention, and I'll continue, even as I raise these issues, to press the Postmaster General and other top leaders of the Postal Service to immediately implement solutions to fix this unacceptable situation. Certainly, the Postal Service shouldn't be a drag on the credit scores of ordinary people who are just trying to pay the bills.
And Senator Warnock is recognized, who is decidedly not boring.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The latest monetary policy report shows inflation in housing costs is gradually easing. That's good news. But many Georgians still feel the sting of unaffordable homes and mortgages. And one reason for this, you and I have discussed this, is that we aren't building enough houses. 2022 study published in the Journal of Economic Geography found that for every 10% increase in the housing stock, rents decreased by 1%. We've discussed this issue, particularly the effects of housing supply on housing costs. And we agreed that while the Federal Reserve does not control housing supply, it can help create the environment that encourages the construction of new housing, particularly affordable housing. Chair Powell, how has the Fed been working to foster an environment that encourages home construction, and what, in your view, are the challenges that remain?
So, I mean, in the long run, the absolute best thing we can do for the housing market and for the economy is to sustainably bring inflation back down so that people aren't talking about it anymore. And it's just assumed by everybody in their daily lives that inflation will be around 2%, so we don't need to talk about it, which is where we were for a long time. We want to get back to that. interest rates can come down then, and the housing market can return to the state it was in before the pandemic, which was to say really tight. We don't have enough housing, and that's not really a monetary policy issue. In the short term, though, I would say tight monetary policy weighs on the housing market. The policy works through interest-sensitive spending, and housing is definitely at the top of the list of interest-sensitive spending. So we understand that we're suppressing, not suppressing, but our higher interest rates have led to lower housing starts and lower activity in the housing market. But we're doing that to get back to 2% inflation for the whole economy so that the housing market can be on a better foundation.
Well, yeah, and related to that, when you have these high interest rates, of course, you see across the country, but particularly in a state like Georgia, these institutional investors who are coming into the space, and they're buying houses in all cash, boxing out first-time, first-generation home buyers. And of course, the conditions for them doing that improve to their favor with higher interest rates. Would you agree with that assessment?
I know some of that's happening. I don't know that higher interest rates make it. I mean, some of they're working with.
Well, you got higher interest rates and you got institutional buyers who can purchase it all cash. Doesn't that further?
But they have to borrow the money at higher interest rates. I'm just saying higher interest rates doesn't make their investment any cheaper. And notwithstanding, I understand it's a sensitive issue, and in most markets, it's still a pretty small portion of the outstanding housing stock. But it's not an issue. It's not an issue for us. They're a legal buyer of housing. Our job is really the whole economy. I mean, it's more of a question for legislatures.
So how can the Fed better deploy its monetary tools to ensure that we are meeting key inflation objectives like housing affordability?
I think the best thing we can do is is kind of what we think we've been doing, which is to move carefully as we think about loosening policy and make sure that we do that when we've got greater confidence that inflation is moving sustainably down toward 2%. We're also keeping a close eye on the labor market, and if we see unexpected weakening there, then we could respond to that too. But that's really the best thing we can do for the whole economy, and very specifically for the housing market too.
You well point out that you're limited in terms of your influence there, and there is a role for Congress to be sure, which is one of the reasons I wanted to be on this committee to introduce a down payment toward Equity Act with my colleague Senator Butler. This bill would help first-generation home buyers compete with Wall Street institutional investors by helping with down payment costs, closing costs, and costs to reduce interest rates. I look forward to continuing productive conversations with you and looking at how we can make housing more affordable for all Americans. I'm running out of time here, but one of the other concerns that I maintain is with respect to reducing the racial wealth gap. Is this issue around home appraisals. And the Fed is part of the interagency task force on property appraisal and valuation equity. What expertise and perspective has the Fed brought to this task force? How are you responding to this issue of home appraisals?
So, as you know, we've been an active participant in that task force, and we bring all of the expertise we have in the housing market, as well as regulatory, supervisory, and economic expertise generally, as we look at that. And I'll also say that our strongly held view is that discrimination has no place in the banking system, and that includes appraisals and other valuations.
I agree with that, and quickly, I was glad to see that CFPB and other agencies recently finalized a rule that creates strong anti-discrimination standards for automated home evaluations. The Fed has not yet approved this rule. Why not, and does the Fed plan to do so?
Sorry, why do we?
You've not yet approved the rule that was made, that was suggested by the CFPB. They finalized the rule.
But do we? Sorry. I'm not aware that it's a rule that we have to finalize too. Is that the case?
That is my understanding.
Let me follow up with you on that. I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thanks to you and Ranking Member Boozman and others for your leadership on such an important issue. These cryptocurrencies and digital commodities are relatively new, but basic consumer and investor protections are not. They are still the pillars of a sound financial system. And I'm glad to see bicameral and bipartisan work taking place on this. As Senator Booker has already pointed out, it's difficult to overstate the urgency. But the questions that I will ask when evaluating any potential legislation are, will this bill better protect families and investors in Georgia and across our country? Will it help grow our economy? And all of that with respect to all of the geopolitical challenges that we face. And basically, will it help prevent folks from being taken advantage of? Will we be effective? Is it effective? Or will we just be able to check the box and say we did something? So, Chair Benham, critics of proposals to expand the CFTC's authority into regulating certain cryptocurrencies note that as a financial regulator, the CFTC has not needed to focus on protecting retail investors, and the Commission lacks the staff experience and the expertise to properly protect consumers. And so around this question of whether what we do will be effective, what can you say to reassure critics that the CFTC is up to this task that we all agree is so very important?
Thanks, Senator Warnock. I'm going to go back to something that I think I've said because it is extremely important, I think very responsive to your question. There is, in fact, what I believe is a misnomer, a mischaracterization of what the CFTC's constituency is. It certainly is large commercial end users, farmers, ranchers, energy providers. It certainly is large financial institutions. But we do have, and have had for a number of years with a sort of growing demand, a fairly large retail investor community. They invest in futures, which are our main bread and butter contract, and also Senator Tupperville mentioned event contracts, a very retail-oriented marketplace. So from a regulated market, we do see a lot of retail investors, and we see that growing. We see growing investor demand and enthusiasm for all types of financial contracts, something I know that this committee should care about very deeply. The second element that I think really is more responsive is around enforcement, and I mentioned this earlier. If you look at our enforcement docket historically, not just in the past year, 2 years, 5 years, but historically, the fraud cases that the CFTC brings are very much related and oriented towards retail fraud. A significant amount of the fraud, as opposed to manipulation of markets, are oriented towards retail investors. And that's because they involve something that's called Forex, foreign exchange, and also physical commodity fraud, which is typically gold and silver, so metals. And you see this in commercials and other types of advertisements. So if you look at our enforcement docket around fraud, it is very much mom and pop, Ponzi scheme, pump and dump fraud that has occurred for decades in financial markets. And because of that record, we have actually built a very robust and deep Office of Customer Education and Outreach, and a vast network of partners at the local and state and federal level in terms of law enforcement to get, and I'll reference what Senator Fisher said, sort of boots on the ground at the local level. So I don't want to dismiss. I mean, we will have work to do. This is a new market. We will have to build up with resources and personnel. But what I do want to just recharacterize is this notion, this fallacy that we are not a retail-oriented regulator. We have a big history on the enforcement side, and we have a growing constituency on the investment side. And I think we can build off of both to be successful in the digital asset space.
Sure. And one of the things that will have to be addressed in any legislation that's proposed, because there are multiple financial regulators involved, is the dividing line between what the SEC should regulate versus the CFTC. And that's something that we'll be taking a look at. But with respect to this issue of capacity to do what we're asking you to do, you requested $399 million for the CFTC's fiscal year 2025 budget. That funding level would support 725 full-time staffers to effectively operate and support the agency in fulfilling its mission. Comparatively, the SEC requested almost $2.6 billion for 5,703 full-time staffers. Is this budget request sufficient for the Commission to take on the potential new role of protecting consumers and investors who are trading digital assets? And if not, what funds and staff levels are necessary?
Thanks, Senator. So as it stands, that budget request, the 399 for 725 FTE, is specifically for our existing required and mandated regulatory responsibilities. So not digital assets. This is for futures, options, and swaps. We have done a fair amount of analysis, happy to share it with you, that if we were to see legislation passed that would create authority for the CFTC to police digital assets, we would have an additional budget request around certainly resources for personnel and for security hardware, IT hardware, cyber hardware. So we've been thinking about it, but certainly it would be above the 399, which you would expect to be commensurate with the requirements that Congress applies to us.
Well, thank you. We look forward to seeing that analysis and what is necessary as we move forward.
Happy to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chairman, welcome back.
Is recognized.
Thank you so very much, Chair Brown, and thank you to all of the nominees for your commitment to serve. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to Commissioner Kristen Johnson, who hails from the great state of Georgia, where she has served as a law professor at Emory University. Congratulations, Commissioner Johnson, and congratulations to your family. As we've discussed in this committee, systemic and cultural issues have plagued the FDIC in recent years. It's clear that senior leadership of the FDIC turned a blind eye to ongoing discrimination, harassment, and abuse. And they failed to properly reprimand or terminate offenders. Simply, the FDIC failed to institute a culture of accountability, and as a result, employee morale is low, which has deep implications for the mission. Ms. Goldsmith Romero, thank you for visiting with me yesterday. I enjoyed our conversation in my office to discuss your plans for the FDIC. If you are confirmed as its next chair, I appreciated your candor. The task you face, as you well recognize, is monumental. This is tough work. The FDIC plays a critical role in ensuring the safety and the soundness of our financial system, and it needs an energized workforce in order to do that. What experience do you have changing organizational cultures, and how do you plan to draw on that experience at the FDIC?
Thank you, Senator. I very much enjoyed our conversation in your office and talking through these are tough issues. So I came into SIGTARP, and it was primarily a law enforcement office. It was male dominated. It was special agents who I have a great regard for, and because they put their lives on the line. But I would say sometimes the level of professionalism, the language, and all of that was not at the level that I thought was appropriate, particularly for an IG's office. And so one of the things I came in and did was sort of raise very high this level of respect and this level of professionalism, this level of dignity by which we would treat each other, but also how we would refer to those we were investigating and anyone that we were coming in contact with. And so that organizational change and being able to do that and bring people along with that, so they didn't fight me on it, but that they actually embraced it and moved in that direction, I think I would bring to the FDIC.
And as you expressed yesterday and expressed today, it seemed it was just part of the culture, and people, this is just how it is.
Yeah, I think cultures can change, and I think you start with the tone at the top and what's acceptable, and you send clear messages as to what's acceptable and what's not.
The Cleary report made 7 recommendations for the FDIC, ranging from protecting victims, improving policies, and holding leadership accountable for inaction When Chair Grunberg came in front of the Banking Committee in May, he agreed to provide a written update and briefing to my subcommittee on the status of these recommendations. Ms. Goldsmith Romero, what is your sense of where the FDIC is in implementing these recommendations?
You know, Senator, it's hard for me to see on the outside, although I read some of the things that are happening on the website, but I'm very committed to being, you know, transparent with you and communicating with you as part of your chair of the subcommittee.
Well, yeah, as I made it clear to him in no uncertain terms that as chair of consumer protection and financial institutions, I would hold him accountable and would hold anyone in that position accountable for cultural and structural changes needed. And I look forward to supporting your nomination and holding you accountable to turning the FDIC around. Certainly, you bring the kind of experience that we need at just this particular moment. Since I've got a little bit more time, a common theme in the postmortems of the bank failures last spring was that there was a brain drain at the FDIC that led to a lack of seasoned and competent bank examiners, which helped prevent issues from being caught early. At the time, this was attributed to low pay and difficult working conditions. We now know that the FDIC failed to protect junior employees, particularly women and people of color, from harassment and retaliation, and failed to punish the wrongdoers. How will you ensure examiners feel empowered while also working to recruit, to retain, and support examiners, specifically examiners who are women and people of color?
Thank you for that, Senator. So first, we gotta make sure that they feel safe. We gotta make sure there's a good process that they trust, that they can raise these complaints, and then we have to empower examiners in other ways that allow them to be nimble, that allow them to use their judgment and their expertise and experience. And I do want to be able to recruit to deal with this issue of the workforce and you know, how long some of them been, and we need to bring more in.
Thank you so much. I think all of this underscores the ways in which these issues that we're raising around the culture, around accountability, abuse, harassment, that these aren't extraneous to the mission. They are central to the ability of FDIC to carry out its mission for employee morale, for folks to remain focused on the work that we require them to do, need them to do in order to protect our financial system. So thank you again for offering yourselves up for service, and I look forward to supporting your nomination.
Thank you, Senator Warnock. Senator Warnock of Georgia is recognized.
Thank you so very much, Chair Brown. I don't believe that giant American corporations should get richer by selling their technologies to authoritarian regimes or human rights abusers. And that's why I was glad to see the Biden-Harris administration take steps in 2021 to further center human rights in U.S. foreign policy through the Export Controls and Human Rights Initiative, an effort aimed at curbing the misuse of American technology by repressive governments and regimes whose human rights record we rightly deplore. 25 nations have signed on to the initiative's code of conduct, leading to more of our allies considering human rights when reviewing their exports of technologies that can perpetuate human rights abuses. We don't want to make the trampling of human rights efficient. Ms. Kindler, can you highlight some successes from the Export Controls and Human Rights Initiative and how they contribute to efforts to combat authoritarian regimes?
Senator, thank you for this question. Human rights is front and center in how we consider export controls. The ECRI, as we know it, the Export Control and Human Rights Initiative, has been very helpful in bringing together countries that share values, even when they don't have export control systems of their own. And it's enabled a dialogue that is desperately needed for our national security and foreign policy. Just today, the Commerce Department released a proposed rule that's connected to ECRI. We're looking at foreign security end users in countries of concern, authoritarian countries, like you note, to ensure that U.S. U.S. persons are not supporting jail operators, foreign police, and that sort of thing. And that is a proposed rule. We're seeking industry comment, but it is connected to ECRI in the sense that it moves our human rights protections forward. We've also been very active at the Commerce Department in adding entities to our entity list, requiring specific licenses for companies and other organizations that may be involved in human rights abuses in contrary to U.S. national security and foreign policy.
So it's important in terms of the advancing of our own values and our commitment to human rights. But could you say more about why it's important that the United States of America lead in this space? My sense and core belief is that there is no replacement for American leadership in the world. It's indispensable. And can you say more about the geopolitical implications of us leading in this space?
U.S. technology is the best in the world. We need to take a leadership role to ensure that it's not used in a way that is contrary to our values. And by taking that stance and working with our allies through multilateral regimes, plurilateral regimes, bilateral relationships, we can bring others into that fold. And there are many countries around the world who do share our values and who are looking at things like facial recognition systems and saying that may be appropriate in an airport context. It is not appropriate when you're surveilling minority populations in Xinjiang or Tibet.
So you would say that the United States is uniquely positioned to lead in this space, and would you also say that it has national security implications for us?
Yes, Senator, I would.
Are additional congressional authorities necessary to expand and improve the efficacy of these initiatives?
Senator, there's several ways where we could bring in technical expertise into the Bureau of Industry and Security. One thing that comes to mind is a highly qualified experts program that we are seeking authority for. We could bring in experts on a temporary basis into the Bureau of Industry and Security who know these technologies well. That's an area where we'd welcome an opportunity to obtain additional authorization and resources. We'd also look at some provisions in our regulations like remote access and the opportunity to control access to data centers and other high-end advanced technology. That's an area where expansion of our authorities under ECRA would be helpful.
Well, thank you so much. There are more questions that I could ask, but maybe we can follow up later. But I'm grateful that the Biden-Harris administration understands that export controls can be an effective tool to combat authoritarian regimes. This is important in this moment, especially when you look at the geopolitical situation, the effort by some to advance a kind of authoritarian approach, both internationally and I would say domestically. So thank you for your work. As surveillance technology continues to improve, we must ensure American corporations are not making money from authoritarian regimes and human rights abusers. All of us have a stake in that project. Thank you very much.
Senator Warnock. Senator Warnock, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been working to tackle the persistent issue of child hunger since well before I was elected to the United States Senate, something that I've addressed a number of times from my pulpit and in cities and towns all across Georgia. It's unconscionable that with all the resources we have in the United States of America, 13.8 million children are food insecure. That's 1 in every 5 children, unsure of where they will get their next meal. And child hunger is worse in the summer months because children lose access to regular school meals. Ms. Fitzsimons, even with USDA's summer food service programs, about how many children fall into this summer meal gap?
Yeah, so only 1 child who participates in the National School Lunch Program during the school year and gets free and reduced price school meals actually has access to a summer meal, 1 in 7.
1 in 7. Now, Congress has actually come up with a solution to fill in this gap. It's called Sunbucks. Sunbucks. How does Sunbucks work? Can you explain it? And how many states so far have opted in? You have to opt in, correct?
Absolutely. So Sunbucks is an amazing new program. It's modeled after the summer EBT program that had been piloted for years, and it's been shown to reduce hunger and improve nutrition. It basically provides an EBT card with $120 on it for grocery benefits so that families are able, it helps replace the lost school meals during the summer.
Right. So the kids aren't in school through Sunbucks. Even though they're not in school, they get access to the nutrition. The need for that nutrition doesn't stop in June or July or August, correct?
Right. And 37 states have adopted it, so we have 13 states who haven't. The District of Columbia has adopted it, all territories, and 2 tribal nations.
Right. So 37 states have adopted it, so I assume these aren't all blue states.
Absolutely
These are
not.
states across the political spectrum, correct?
Yep.
But unfortunately, my home state, the state of Georgia, has not opted in to Sunbucks, with some officials saying it does not result in higher nutritional outcomes for students, and that existing programs are, quote, effective. I heard our state leadership say we don't need it. I'm still trying to figure out who this we is. For whom are you speaking when you say we don't need it? Ms. Fitzsimons, when school was out this summer, were there children in Georgia who didn't know where their next meal would come from?
Absolutely.
Are extreme hunger and food insecurity good for kids' nutritional outcomes? Does it help with learning?
No, they are very bad. Kids who are food insecure don't do as well in school, are more likely to be sick. There's lots of problems related to food insecurity, that's for sure.
Makes them vulnerable in a whole lot of ways, I would imagine.
Yes.
What are the outcomes for students who have participated in Sunbucks?
So we have evaluations of the summer EBT demonstration projects, and they show that food insecurity goes down and nutrition goes up. So it's a really important complement to the summer nutrition programs that provide meals to kids.
Sounds like a good program. I hope we can bring it to Georgia.
Me too.
You know, keeping hungry kids, it seems to me, should not be partisan. It's not partisan. 37 states have opted in. And so this should be a shared goal of all elected officials because it is the moral responsibility of any functioning society, especially a wealthy one, the wealthiest nation on the planet and in human history.
So if I could add, I mean, I think particularly in a Hunger Action Month, which we are in now, this reminder of, the 13.8 million is almost the entire population of Pennsylvania. Right? So just for perspective,
Sure.
We are a Sunbucks participant, seen the success of that, but we also know the economic benefits of local food systems. Yep. And I would just sort of say that whether you're in the National School Lunch or breakfast or the farmers market nutrition or SNAP, all of that also provides an economic opportunity for the farms, right? There's a co-equal goal.
For farms, that's correct.
Farms and businesses.
Right.
So I think there's a co-equal goal where you're really honoring the need and recognition of food and nutrition.
Sure.
At the same time, you're trying to pull that from the local. I think the Buy American provision, Senator noted, is absolutely, these things go together to recognize.
As a member of the Ag Committee, I support that. This is a win-win-win for farmers and for children and families. I could ask another question, but I just want the record to show that Cory Booker is a lawyer by training. I'm a Baptist preacher by training. He went a minute over. You can get the rest of your time back, Mr. Chairman.
Duly noted.